Okay, wonderful. So this is going to be our midterm review, and I want to go over all the many things that we could talk about. When you compare this midterm versus maybe other classes, my personal opinion is you may well have fit in almost an entire course into these 5 or 6 weeks in terms of what you've covered. Now, I do think that there's a bit more to accomplish, but there's probably a lot more details that we've conveyed over the last couple of weeks. So what I want to try to do in the next couple of minutes is try to go over the stuff that I think we should talk about on the midterm in a number of ways. But let me just say that in a midterm context, we only want to ask questions that would evaluate whether you've participated, whether you've experienced these things firsthand. A person who has done this hands-on would know the difference between A and B, and most of the questions will be true or false. I hope that's okay. There won't be any multiple choice, and probably 15 or 20 questions. Most people take about a half an hour to do my midterms. Okay, but why don't we try to cover the gamut of things that we've done? Me, in my mind, a big piece of this class is the cloud. And when we say the cloud, we really mean Amazon Web Services. There's nothing really like it. The basis for Amazon is JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation. And there's a couple important pieces of Amazon that I think make our stuff work. One is S3. S3 is fundamentally an HTTP or an HTTPS service. So even though it deals with files, its real value is in acting as a web server. And the reason why it works as a web server is because really web pages are really just files. So this bucket is just an instance of Apache or Light TPD or whatever they use in the background to serve traffic over HTTPS or HTTP. So when you take a look at your assets there, everything has an initial HTTPS link, and that's going to link up with content, and that's just moving around content that loads and interprets nicely in a web browser. So this is the kind of content. So people should be thinking about JavaScript as source code. People should be thinking about the web browser as an interpreter or a form of compiler. And the internet is a very large distributed computing platform. That's the right way to think of the internet. And web development is just tapping into that very globally diverse programmable environment. And so Amazon adjusts that paradigm dramatically by offering this very real internet-based source of computing that's just a quick sync away. So there may well be a few questions on the exam that feel philosophic in nature that ask you to speculate as to what you're doing when you're using a third-party cloud. You're not managing your resources in the same way. We're abstracting away a lot of that nitty-gritty in favor of a third party. And we may well ask you some philosophical questions about how that impacts your development, whether it facilitates, it removes complexity, or whether it adds security. Now, let's just say that take the devil's perspective and you say, well, the last thing you want to do is you put your business in somebody else's hands to manage. And that's an interesting proposition that Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, Sony, really Netflix, when Netflix does it, they're also putting their business in the hands of somebody else. So in many ways, if you think about the history of business, it's hard to conceive of corporations doing exactly this. It really is. Even for businesses that have strong sort of Asian supply chains, at least they are procuring retail space here in America and they actually manage something of their own. But what if you were a large department store that rented square footage retail space for your operations and you relied upon UPS to bring you your inventory every 72 hours? That to me reminds me of the Amazon Web Services situation where you are renting those computing facilities. Somebody else, go to Ontario Mills Mall, which for the YouTube world, that is a big mall that's down the street from us. What makes Ontario interesting is it's right across the highway from an international freight airport. And what happens is it brings both the visitors of the mall in on planes, right, from Asia, right, where they are stocking up on stuff. Lots of tourists come there and other places, but primarily Asia, which is really, really interesting. And then you have a lot of goods would arrive from Asia as well. And so it's kind of a mall next to an airport. And the purpose of the place is to liquidate a lot of outlet-grade goods. It's a wonderful place to go get your stuff. That's Ontario Mills. So if you think about that, well, do those stores own their store within Ontario Mills? No, no one does. They merely rent that space. So who secures the doors there? Really the mall employees, the mall security are the ones who secure, the billions of dollars of retail inventory there, which puts us into an interesting position, which is have businesses put their operations into the hands of other people before and succeeded. And you'd have to say, well, the easy example is the mall system, right? That's a good example of that. So, we may well ask you philosophic questions of that nature. So we have that. So that's S3. So that's where your stuff is. Now, DynamoDB is the next piece. It's going to interest you that you guys haven't written any SQL yet. You've been relying mostly upon sorting and predicates and non-SQL to move content around. I think everything inside of here is kind of based upon your primary key. What's also interesting is that the number of attributes within a NoSQL database can be adjusted on a per row basis. So no static schema needs to be defined ahead of time. In many ways, the DynamoDB is a cloud database, so it's not disk-centric, such as a relational SQL, MySQL, which really wants to have disks to manage. So the rows within a MySQL database are going to be defined ahead of time within an interesting schema, and you would know that well. Here, the row-by-row attribute set is unique. So you could have 20 attributes on one row, you could have 2 on the other. The only thing that binds all data objects together within a DynamoDB is that item ID, or that unique identifier. So a good trivia question on DynamoDB is, what is the most important attribute to define within DynamoDB when we create a DynamoDB table? Is it the row attributes, right? Or is it the primary key? That would be a good question. And we could riff on that a little bit. Now, the next piece we take a look at, the access control, is to say, what is the importance of access control within DynamoDB? For example, could a developer not establish access control within a DynamoDB table and still get traffic? And a good answer would be, well, no, because you haven't seen that happen before. You would say, well, maybe, but really you need to say true or false. And really your answer is, well, no, I've never seen DynamoDB work without that IAM configuration, identity access management, which brings us to the next, investigation, which is how crucial is identity and access management within Amazon Web Services? Firstly, is Amazon Web Services more reliable, more secure than more traditional server-based infrastructures? And the answer is it's quite a bit more reliable. And one of the major reasons why AWS is more reliable, more secure is that OAuth protocol. So let's just bring some last-minute attention to that. OAuth is a big reason why Amazon Web Services maintains its high degree of security. So if you go through your process, really you have 2 big ideas within IAM. One is roles and policies. You've established roles that contain multiple policies. Usually when you interact with DynamoDB, you've got yourself a policy that pertains to Dynamo. That also pertains to your S3. So if you're doing stuff by uploading files into your S3, that'll also show up here as well. And I think this is our right role. So the first thing that we did in uploading files is we established S3 permissions. And then the next thing we did is we established DynamoDB permissions. And so really the only kinds of access that you guys have gotten is where Amazon has limited access by role. So there's role-based access control inside of Amazon Web Services that is token-based, i.e. it's OAuth dependent. And no access begins without there being first some kind of a login moment. I have logged in already, but there has to be that Facebook login. And really the purpose of that is so that Facebook kind of validates the login. Here, let's go to developers.facebook. And here I have my app called CSU 311. You and I made an app. We have that app ID. And so what happens is the person, whoever your user is, authenticates given their Facebook credentials. Not credentials that they establish with you guys, but rather with an OAuth provider. So Facebook says, great, I'll take your credentials, I'll return whether you're authenticated or not, and then if you're authenticated, I'll give you a token. Amazon accepts Facebook's token, which would be sitting in your browser, and then Amazon says, okay, thanks a lot, I'll take that token, and I'm going to trust Facebook. That's a trusted identity. And then we'll take that token, and if you have that token from that trusted provider, then we'll allow you to walk around Amazon. So the question is, okay, nude hacking scandal. Remember how we talked about how somebody stole images from different actresses and claimed that he had sorted pictures, as if these people kept sorted pictures on their phone, which is innately doubtable. People are smarter than that. But despite the salacious headlines, we said, well, really, that's very doubtable that anybody was able to walk around Amazon's cloud, picking off Lindsay Lohan's pictures. It's just doubtful. It's almost impossible. And largely it's due to that OAuth token thing, where because you have that token, you may be able to get access, but you probably have very restricted access based upon the role-based access control. So when you construct a graph of what necessary pieces are put together, one, you have an OAuth provider in the form of Facebook. Two, you have an OAuth accepted, you have an OAuth protocol receiver in the form of Amazon. Then you're going to have a role-based access control that controls what you can see once you've been trusted. So in many ways, that's a very interesting layered security protocol, where it's very hard to break into a cloud given all the pieces that need to come together and the doubtfulness that anybody ever cracked, Scarlett Johansson or Jennifer Lawrence's, iCloud account. It's highly doubtable. The joke here is, guess where Apple gets a lot of its cloud resources? Amazon. Okay. If you use Siri, or if you're an iPhone user, most likely every time you use Siri and other iCloud features, you're actually tapping into S3. So let's just say that if you guys are using the same cloud that Apple, Sony, Netflix, Uber are using, you guys are pretty cool. You guys are pretty hip and modern. You should make your apartments all white with wooden floors and wear cowboy boots or those Chelsea boots, and you should put a lot of gel in your hair this evening because you're cool, okay? And you do things the way that pro devs do it. There's no baby version, right? There's no like desktop MySQL that is a practice. You guys are live on the internet with real security, and you can walk that into any given development shop and talk to people about that. And that is in itself something I should put on the midterm, which is, can a CSU 311 student walk into a modern production environment and contribute on the first day? Yes or no? And the answer is not at all. No, just kidding. The answer is yes. The answer is you should, and you should have some ego and swagger. That's what helps you, So those are all important foundational questions. Shoot, we could do 15 questions just on what we just discussed, right? Couldn't we just do 15 questions based on the variation? Should you apply for a job now? Yes or no? Or you can get work based upon your AWS skills. True or false? Third question. Are you employable based upon your AWS skills? True or false? We can just keep going until you're like, I've answered the same question 15 times. Maybe I should make a DICE profile. Maybe I should make a Simply Hired profile, etc. So that's my little bit of YouTube humor there. The next piece, why don't we take a look at code that we have. And I think that, GitHub has been good to us, thus far. I just type G in my browser and I go right to my The two big projects that we were looking at, one is our S3 demo. And what we may well do is just copy and paste some code and have you guys answer a question about it. Does that make sense? That would be the best way for me to drill you, which is, say I add an ID to a div. What does that enable me to do? And basically, the purpose of the ID is for you to locate that div within JavaScript. And therefore, what is the purpose of getElementById? It's to collaborate with the ID piece given any HTML element, which can be loaded with an ID. Which brings us to another question: is what if you use jQuery? What major piece of JavaScript is automated and facilitated by jQuery? It's getElementById. So even though jQuery and JavaScript can live in the same script and they correlate, and jQuery just is a wrapper for JavaScript, really the purpose of jQuery is grabbing any element by ID and controlling its attributes without the use of getElementById. But if you are comfortable using getElementById, do you need to use jQuery? And the answer is no, you do not. That's the purpose of jQuery, though jQuery in itself has a lot of useful automations if you can live with its syntax, which is in itself challenging. But here we have kind of both versions. Now, what's also interesting is here's our put objects. And I have some students who want me to zoom in, so that's what we're going to do. Here's an example of on our S3 sample where we did a put object. And you either get an error back or you get data back. And in the case that you get data, if you have an error, you put the error inside of the results, which is good, convenient. That means that you know how to write JSON that comes back from AWS. But also, within the list objects piece right here, this is actually the way that we parse the content of the data that we get back. And that's kind of the last lecture that you guys had before this midterm. And that's what we're going to hack for the remainder of the class, the 5 odd weeks that we have left. We're basically going to be leveraging this statement in order to grab the contents of the data and then for loop through it and then grab whatever those contents are and then paste them back into results. And then of course we could also talk about Facebook. What happens in Facebook? Where does Facebook get its code from? A lot of its code is copy pasted, but a lot of the code is grabbed from Facebook itself. And so in order to execute this JavaScript, we actually need to grab JavaScript from Facebook. And that's a good way to explain why we get a lot of code back that we never put there. So for example, if we get on up to the Facebook div, and let's get into the S3, it's pretty interesting to see all the code that Facebook puts there for us. So let's go up to example index.html. Maybe that's, which one has the file upload? Is it Dynamo 2? Maybe I no longer have that there. Well, no, index. That would be showing off the index. So let's grab index. And if this is in fact the right one, see how it kind of logged me into Facebook right there? I want to choose a file. And let's not grab the primary, let's not grab any SSL certs. And let's upload that. And then it will give me some quick, it kind of says congratulations. What's interesting is you look in the Facebook root, hey, wait a second, I didn't code any of this. How did that get there? And so what a good question would be is how did Facebook get its content over to us? And a big reason why is going to be Facebook's code within our script. That will send us its Facebook stuff right here and place it into your Facebook div. So that's something that we can talk about, which is pretty interesting. And I mean, by now we will have reached 20 questions for sure. But there's a couple other interesting things that we could talk about. For certain, this CRUD test is a good one. And I don't believe that we use a lot of jQuery here. But we do correctly construct Amazon document clients. The real gist for document client is to simplify the API that we use to interact with DynamoDB. So if we get down to our Dynamo API set, or our toolkit, as it were, we go to our full test. This is kind of our current sample. We rely heavily upon the document client in order to pose queries against our DynamoDB. Now we could talk about the regions. Why do you query a region? Really, that's a separate data center that's out there on the internet that you guys use. So US West 2 is an actual place on Oregon. There's probably a lot of like rainbows there, and guys with big like logging boots walking in and out, and there's vampires. It's Oregon. There's a big hydroelectric dam there, I suppose. That's US West 2. That's the site where your queries are going. We're going to load it up with params, and then we're going to get that result data. Now, to me, what I want to talk about is the format of the result data. So when we scale back a little bit and we take a look at what the data looks like once it comes back. Here, let's make a unique item ID. Let's give an attribute. Let's put that there. And if that's okay by us, this is the results that we get back. And then what can we get? And so we actually get the results back, and let's not fill that, but let's get that back for that item. And we should be able to update that item as well with that value. And we should be able to get that value with that update. That's right. And so we should be able to take a look at this item that we get. This happens to be the attribute that we get with it. And then we can also fully delete that item. So if we get it again, there's nothing there any longer. So that kind of stuff is something that we could discuss one way or another. So I think a good way to prepare for this exam would be to actually walk back through all the code that you've written for this class and kind of run through it again. Look at it, see if you understand it. What have you copied and pasted? What have you not studied in depth, just in case you haven't? And here you have all the items here. Let's see if I can add a new attribute here. No, that's not quite happening yet. So we don't quite have the freedom to add, new attributes. And that's largely because when we put, we usually insert into attribute 1 and then to item ID. So we're doing pretty well right there. Now this result data gets pushed to the console, so it doesn't get pushed up to the divs. So that's kind of what we're going to be working with, is really, and we could ask about this, is that what more do we need to do in order to push our JSON from Amazon back into our HTML on our page? And what we need to do is we need to work with it the same way we did in our index. Where we need to do something along these lines, data contents for each. So that's what we're going to be doing toward the second half of the class, is really working with the data package once we get it back down into JavaScript. So we're going to give some more time to work with that. Good. Okay, I'm feeling tired. I'm going to take a quick break.